never know what will happen at Worlds.
The stage is set, the curtain is drawn.
没人能够预见会是这种情况。
This is the game people want to see.
新的王者诞生了
Kaboom! They've lit the fuse.
你看到了吗
They're gonna win. This is it.
Welcome back to Worlds 2020 in Shanghai. We already had a clash between LCK squads. It wasn't that hot, but today we'll get a different flavor of regional rivalry as the LPL's Suning and JDG face off. I'm Shox, joined by Vedius and by Frosk. And let me tell you, if you thought yesterday was a doozy, it won't be the same today. That's what we hope, at least.
I can assure you that while the series might be one-sided, it might not be. I can assure you both teams will participate today.
That's great. And, you know, if you don't know what we're referring to, yesterday we saw our first quarterfinal match, and all the pre-tournament expectations of Dom1 dominance were in full display. They once again swept DRX 3-0, but honestly, I don't know if it was even any sweat off their brow.
It didn't feel like it. I think that many saw it as a predetermined outcome, especially after the finals from
DRX.
Confirmed, not a fluke.
And I thought that, I genuinely believe that DRX just didn't play as well as they could have in the final. So I was actually quite excited for this matchup because I thought, like, we'll finally get to see what DRX is really capable of, and it seemed like that really was all that they were capable of. They still showcased draft issues. A lot of their execution issues still came through, and I was overall quite disappointed because I felt like that there was more potential there with this DRX squad, and we just didn't get to see it.
And do not get me wrong, if there's, you know, concrete takeaways from yesterday, it is how powerful Damwon is.
For sure.
But the thing is that sometimes you get series where both teams play well and one team plays better. That was not what happened yesterday. DRX did not play very well, and then Damwon just slapped them repeatedly. And I think that while it's fine to, you know, hype up Damwon and be excited about the precision, the discipline, how incredibly powerful this team is, I don't know if they can get away with that against some of the other teams that are still left in this tournament.
They weren't really tested. I think we can all agree on that. Also, in terms of action, it was the lowest combined kills per minute game compared to any best of 5 we had at Worlds in 2019. In fact, lower. And that's what it looked like. It looked like a slow suffocation from the side of Damwon. They knew when to pull the trigger. They knew they were never really in any real danger. That doesn't take away the human aspect, though. DRX looked absolutely destroyed afterwards, but there can only be one who goes on, and Damwon was clearly stronger.
Yeah, it is unfortunately the nature of this tournament in that it is quite cutthroat. You know, like when you are out for good, and there are no second chances. Of course, the bright side for Damwon is, as you rightly said, I don't think they had to show a lot. I think that one of the cool things about Damwon is that they are a bit of a different flavor relative to any other LCK team this year. They are willing to scrap with you, and the JDG game earlier in the tournament is a great representation of that, where they'll fight you at level 1, they'll keep that snowball going, and they will look to dominate. So I'm still optimistic that what we saw from Damwon yesterday is not their final form, and I'm hoping that whether they go up against a G2 or a Gen G, we'll get to see more of that Damwon later in the tournament.
And I think that's the other kind of concrete takeaway from that series is that you can't play slow against Damwon. You have to try to match them, because if you do, they're just smarter than you.
Yeah.
It looked like DRX were trying to play Damwon's game, except Damwon were just a much better team at doing it. So if any team wants to look competitive against them, you have to come out swinging, because otherwise they're just going to slowly suffocate you and put you in the chokehold.
It's not going to work. And for an inside take on Damwon, after our first quarterfinal yesterday, Lore caught up with Damwon's Canyon to learn more about their win.
And welcome back to the interview studio here in Berlin. Damwon advanced to semifinals, and Canyon, thank you very much for joining me. It must have been an interesting matchup for you, because you've been used to playing against DRX the whole year. So did you have any expectations coming against them today?
네, 우선 승리하시고 4강 진출하신 거 정말 축하드려요. 사실 담원은 이제 LCK에서 1년 내내 DRX를 많이 상대해 봤기 때문에 조금 이거에 대해서 이해도가 있을 것 같은데, 오늘 경기 어떤 식으로 좀 예상하셨나요?
일단 경기 저는 DRX의 경기력을 봤을 때 좀 날카롭고 매섭게 플레이하는 거 좀 잘한다 생각했는데, 그래서 좀 어렵겠다고 생각했는데 의외로 오늘 3대 0으로 빨리 끝내서 지금 엄청 기분 좋은 것 같아요.
So in the recent games, I think DRX, they were really on edge and they were super sharp with their decision making and performance. So we thought that this is going to be a very hard match for us as well. But surprisingly, we were able to pick up a 3-1 victory, and I'm very glad.
Interesting. So do you think it's DRX underperforming or you overperforming here?
그러면 오늘 DRX가 조금 부진했던 걸까요? 아니면 오늘 담원이 굉장히 좋은 경기력을 보여준 거라고 볼 수 있을까요?
DRX보다 저희가 좀 더 팀 합이 잘 맞고 의사소통을 잘한 것 같다고 저 생각하고 있어요.
I think we had better teamwork and communication compared to DRX.
All right, thank you for these answers. Now, moving forward to semifinals, I heard that you wanted to face G2 and maybe later TES. Tell me about these two matchups.
네, 이제 4강전에 대해서 먼저 얘기해보자면 G2를 만나고 싶다고 하셨다고 들었어요. 그리고 결승에선 TES를 만나고 싶다고 하셨는데 이에 대해서 좀 얘기 부탁드려요.
일단 G2는 저희가 작년에 좀 뼈아픈 패배를 했기 때문에 만나고 싶었고, 이제 TS는 지금 거의 다 인정하는 거의 탑 팀이잖아요. 그래서 꼭 이겨보고 싶은 두 팀인 것 같아요.
So for G2, we had a very heartbreaking loss up against them last year, so we want our revenge. And for TES, I mean, TES is like the best team, and a lot of people are also already saying that they are the favorites and the best team. So I really want to take them down for once.
And I think we all want to see how you guys can compete against TS. Maybe in the finals, we'll see. But okay, focusing on the LPL quarterfinals, we're going to have JDG versus Suning. Tell me about the jungle matchups. We're going to have Kanavi and Sofm facing each other. What do you think about these players?
그러면 이제 LPL 팀들 간에 진행되는 8강에 대해서 좀 여쭤보고 싶은데, 이제 JDG 대 수닝 경기가 치러집니다. 소품과 이제 카나비 선수의 약간 정글 맞상대 어떻게 생각하시는지, 두 선수에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시나요?
저는 개인적으로 두 선수 진짜 정말 잘한다고 생각하고 있고, 제 생각에 둘의 플레이 스타일도 좀 비슷한 것 같긴 한데, 약간 뭔가 픽에 따라 갈릴 것 같다. 둘 다 엄청 잘하는 선수라서 저도 예측하기 좀 힘든 것 같아요.
So I think both players are great players, and they are having a very similar play style. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen, and I think it's going to come down to their picks.
To their picks, as often in this meta, it all comes down to the draft. But Canyon, thank you very much for the interview, and Jason, thanks again for the translation. And back to you guys.
Thank you very much. We're skipping a couple of stages here, already talking about Damwon versus TES. That would be a dream matchup, it looks like, but we're not there yet. And today, we're going to start with that LPL side of the bracket, Suning versus JDG. And as a primer for that LPL clash, we are going to dive into today's Red Bull top play, which looks back on SOFM's three-man kick versus G2. There were, in fact, a few moments that were great from Suning in the group stage. This was a beautiful one.
Yeah, SOFM, one of his signature picks is Lee Sin. SOFM stands for Style of Me, and that's exactly what he did in this play, is he styled all over G2. Probably one of the few players in this tournament where the Lee Sin never really falls off because of making plays like this.
It's a Knight's Vow, really.
Yeah, it was really impressive, actually, because many were convinced that Lee Sin had no spot in the meta, and I think that because of how talented SOFM is on this champion, he showcased that if you play it right, depending on how you use it, it can be very effective. And I was very impressed with his performance, especially on the Lee Sin.
I love when good players come to the World Championship, or great players, because it doesn't matter if something isn't in the meta. Of course, it can't be completely inviolable, but maybe sometimes they even make that work, but it doesn't really matter. If you are great at a certain pick, sometimes that is just the best decision. And I think Lee Sin and SOFM are a great pair in that regard.
And it has been such a long time coming to finally see this Vietnamese jungler take the stage. He was a single game away all the way back in 2016, and that was the closest that he ever got to Worlds. And he didn't even know that he was playing in the Worlds qualifier. He thought he was playing in the Demacia Cup. So seeing him overcome a language barrier, seeing him join multiple teams, now seeing him rise to this echelon, like, it's about damn time the world knows of Style of Me.
That is a great note to end on as we're stepping away for just a second. But soon I'll be joined by LPL caster Lyric for an in-depth look at today's quarterfinal. Don't miss it.
To hold our heads up high and beat the drums, do what we love. 遇到 LPL 队伍是我不太想预计的，但是冠军毕竟只有一个，也没有那么多兄弟队陪你打到最后。
JD will match up here against Su Ning.
Team kill after team kill. That's the LPL history, my friends.
因为 LPL 队伍之间打的话，就不会出现那种很一边倒的局势，就感觉可以给观众们带来一个更加激烈的 BO5。
我们第一场就是要面对京东嘛，我觉得京东这个队的话，优势就是他们5个人打得很团结，然后指挥的也非常到位，感觉他们就是5个人就是像一个人在打。
The hexagotomatum has the engage, dives in, 3-man stun, there's the hexagotomatum.
我觉得我们打法可能就是比较偏上半区，所以作为上路的我觉得我肯定是要争取要开的。
这个阵型船长，哇，还有一个后跟，
他的对线风格，我觉得就是比较擅长于压制吧，然后比较喜欢推线。我也经常打这种类型的选手吧，我觉得在这方面还是比较有经验的。应该对线方面还是比较有自信的。
Does find the brush, however, Zoom trying to dash around, and here's the Chinese Renekton we've been looking for.
我觉得杜姆也是个很优秀的选手吧，然后我觉得他的风格是跟我一些不太一样的，他会对团队考虑一些很多东西，然后不管是选英雄还是打法。
He's gonna get sent straight packing for the fountain. He turns it back around, he kills Canyon, and JDG Zoom may have just saved the game for his team.
我觉得我打法就是比较对团队考虑比较少，不管是选英雄还是打法，我觉得我是比较想要线上打出优势的这种打法，然后开队友。
Beat my die actually.
Oh, does manage to grab the kills. The rest of Suning turn up, and Bin gets out alive.
虽然说我们是 LPL 内战嘛，8强的话，但是我觉得我也不会就是怕一下 LPL 队伍会怎么样。我觉得就是肯定这种肯定是有实力的赢了就行了，不要考虑太多，因为其实目标现在都是夺冠嘛，所以也不在乎对手是谁，队友是哪个赛区的，只要把自己该打出的东西打好，然后赢下所有的比赛，想着这些，我觉得就行了。
Wonderful teaser video, and welcome back everyone to World's Countdown, where I'm joined by the perfect person to get us into this LPL clash, LPL expert Lyric. Hello, Lyric.
Hey, Shocks. Thanks for having me on. What a wonderful day. The e-commerce wars, as we call it in the LPL, a matchup we didn't get in playoffs. This is awesome.
This is awesome indeed. I'm glad you're as excited as I am, and it should be no surprise because this is your home region. Now, I know that for many fans and probably for you all as well, it's a bit of a bummer to see that all the LPL teams are on one side of the bracket. However, that could also be seen as something really exciting because ideally we should get some really good matches. What can you say to hype up the neutral fans for this LPL match we're going to see today and the further LPL teams in the side of the bracket?
So I'm the perfect person for this question because I'm betraying my LPL brethren. I'm so happy we got this matchup because, like I said, we didn't get this in playoffs. Both of these teams play very similar styles, right? It's about top, jungle, and support. We're going to get some explosive early games, great level ones, and some amazing team fights later on.
Yay. Okay, good. That's exactly what I was looking for. Tell me first your high-level thoughts about this matchup. As you touched on, these teams have not met in best of fives. JDG did get the upper hand when it came to the regular season matches this year. But how did they match up today?
For me, I think it's going to be very top jungle centric, but in very different ways because Sofm works more autonomously from his team, where Bin will still go for those aggressive trades. So maybe we'll see Sofm invading around top side, but not really in tandem with Bin, where we can expect Kanavi to give some ganks to Zoom, try to shut Bin down. And I think this top side is going to be a super important factor.
We're going to dive super deep into that topside matchup later, indeed. I do want to get your take on kind of Kanavi versus Sofm, because to me, it seemed like Kanavi came in with the biggest amount of hype, that high damage jungler. The meta is completely made for him. But it almost seems like Sofm has stolen his thunder so far when it comes to kind of the LPL team's junglers showing up. How do you think that's going to translate into this best of five specifically? And have we seen everything Kanavi has to offer yet?
I think, unfortunately for Kanavi, a lot of the level ones from other teams, and especially JDG's drafts, really prevented us from seeing the best in him. But matching up against Sofm, I expect we'll see that primetime Kanavi coming out today. You said Sofm has kind of taken that style, but he's really even pushed it further, even ignoring neutral objectives just to keep his jungle timers like cycling correctly. So I think it'll be a bit different, but I still think you should favor Kanavi coming in.
Okay, let's see what he can show us then today. There is so much to say about the top side, and I think that's super fair as well. But talk to me about the rest of the map and where you could see an advantage for one or the other team.
So I think one underlooked part of this matchup is probably mid lane because, right, both of these mids are more facilitators for their team. But I think an interesting dynamic that can happen today is their champion pools, because we've seen Yagao has a lot of pocket pick assassins, things like the Kiana, things like the LeBlanc, to where Angel and Summer has been a lot more about these control mages, the Orianna, the Syndra, things along those lines. So I think maybe the mid matchup for Suning, the fact that Angel does play a lot more meta champions, can give it a bit of spice.
That could surprise us. Now, I don't think it is taking anyone aback that Suning are the underdogs here versus JDG, who are the top 2 team coming out of the LPL. But what are your predictions and why?
So my head tells me JDG should inch this one out. You know, they've been the better team all year long. We've seen them tested and adapt in best of 5s, but you got to follow your heart, Shocks.
True.
And my heart tells me Suning have improved from regular split to playoffs to Worlds. And most importantly, Bin's father sat him down before Worlds. He said, "Hey, son, make it to semifinals." So I'm betting on the fatherly buff coming out for Suning 3-2.
Wow, 3-2. That's music to my ears. I'm believing in Suning. I like it. Voting with the heart. Thank you so much, Lyric.
Yep, thanks.
No problem. I'm sure we'll hear from Lyric as the day goes on. I'm going to take the long walk as I show you our awesome studio that we have here at the World Championship. He gave us a lot of good information, I would say. And I feel like it's in line with what we wanted to touch on regardless. I do want to set the stage for these 2 teams specifically. In terms of JDG, they were the team that was the second best team in summer, but nailed it. But also, when we look at TES and JDG, the 2 best teams in LPL with very different styles, and today we get the brain on the riff.
Yeah, I think that Lyric did a great job of setting up the scene for us, because I'm really excited to see both these teams play. And I think that when you look at the history, what is fascinating is that they are branded as the e-commerce wars. Frosk, you have a lot more insight into this, but the huge brands that come in from behind them, the amount of investment that both these teams come in, I think that it was a huge domestic narrative that a lot of people were excited to see.
When they came in 2016, they actually bought fans to come and cheer for them. They had employees, and they would give out, this is actually true, they would give out tickets for their employees to go and watch the games. Suning is kind of like a Best Buy. You'd buy like electronics, blenders, TVs, things like that. JD is basically Amazon. I have bought everything from JD. Half of my wardrobe still comes from them. So they're massive corporations, which is obviously really big when you have endemic sponsors to this size getting involved into the LPL. Now, these rosters have been a long time coming. Knight used to play for Suning. Loken used to play for Top. Like, it's now a musical chairs of how these rosters all landed and now being the final representatives of the LPL. Like, while the global audience might not know who these names are, they have been in the pressure cooker for a while now. And I'm just so happy to see them finally set foot on the stage.
Yeah, both of them hold a lot of promise. It is, of course, a bit tricky that they're now up versus each other and one of them is about to go home. JDG, that stable team, the brain, the strategy, playing the games out in a controlled yet aggressive manner. And then Suning, kind of for me, such an exciting team to watch. Not that JDG isn't exciting, but I felt what Lyric said. With your heart, you just want these players to succeed and to show us the next level.
And that's the thing, you know, with JD, we've kind of seen those players, or at least some of the evolution of them, but it feels like they've hit their ceiling. Whereas Suning, this is, you know, very young, inexperienced players kind of slammed between these veterans in Sword Art and SOFM. And the question is, what does their ceiling actually look like? And will this be the start of their chapter where you get to turn the page and have a massive upset? And this is, you know, the start of the super team that could be, or do they still need some time left to cook? Is the pressure cooker not done for them? And it kind of, it's like better luck next year, boys.
I think what's really interesting is when you look at their playoffs, they were incredibly dominant outside of their game versus top esports, right? And losing to top esports, of course, there's no shame in that. But when it comes to the best of 5s, as Lyric was saying, and as we've been talking a lot about, we haven't seen them play up against JDG. This might be the perfect matchup for them. Like, there's still so much unknown about this, and when you compare it to yesterday's series where it felt like a foregone conclusion, I feel like that there's still a lot to happen in today's
like
best of 5. Yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting.
I do want to push back a little bit on what Lyric was saying, because while you can look at these teams and you can say there are very similar elements, you know, there are Lumao and Sword Art, captains of their teams, very engage-worthy supports. You know, you have carry-oriented top laners in Bin and Zoom, all-star junglers in Kanavi and SOFM, and then kind of your team-oriented talented mid laners that are kind of secondary supports, they still play almost in vastly different styles, and it's because of the jungle matchup specifically. Kanavi is much more his team plays for him, whereas SOFM is so selfish.
Yep.
He plays for himself, everyone plays around him, and then he kind of gives his advantage over into his teammates.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we talk a lot about how JDG are kind of considered the favorites. So I wanted to talk a little bit on the telestrator how I think Suning could actually take down JDG today. Now, Frosk set that up beautifully for me as she talked very much about the junglers, because when we look at how JDG ended up losing during the group stage, it was largely what was happening in the early game. Level 1 plays are very important in the current meta. We all know that, everyone knows that, but specifically for JDG, when you shut down Kanavi in the early game, it's actually a great way to mitigate his influence on the map and actually be able to get into the mid game in a very healthy spot. Let's look at that very first game versus PSG. When we look at the map, what's happening in this early game is PSG is setting up for a very traditional invade setup into the laning phase as my arrow tries to respond, and you kind of get deep vision into the lane. When they're running the Caitlyn Lux, it sets you up very nicely. You then have the Syndra coming down from the river as well to offer that additional support. Now, typically what would often happen is the enemy opposition would go through the lane as well, and then they would look to try and contest that vision or make sure that they have information for themselves. But JDG choose to go through the river and actually get a collapse because they think they can actually get a pick. And when we look at things from JDG's perspective, they'll actually notice the Caitlyn out of position and they'll think, oh, this is a great opportunity for us to maybe get a bit of poke damage down. Maybe we can actually gain an advantage. What they don't realize is that PSG is actually lying in wait and they're able to get this initial pick. Now, okay, this doesn't look too bad initially for JDG, but things get worse as JDG try to get something back. Because in the bot lane, they've tried very hard to push in this wave. They want to try and get control over the bot side of the map to try and mitigate the influence of the Caitlyn Lux. Kanavi is also trying to invade, thinking that the Kindred is starting up towards the top side. However, the Kindred very rapidly went from red down to blue, and mid lane has the push, which means that everything for PSG is in a position to shut down this JDG level 2 play. Notice as he walks in, he's been spotted by the vision in the river, and Kaiwing and Unified can also collapse as well, allowing them to get this pick. And because the Syndra arrives first, it actually results in another 2 early kills. So this was a perfect setup for PSG to then transition into the mid to late game where they were able to win a number of fights. We saw the same thing when they played up against Damwon. Early on, what they want to use with their composition, very common play with the Lilia, is a delayed invade onto the rafters. Now, as you'll notice with the Camille, she's lying in wait, hovering around the blue buff so that she can rotate down. Damwon know that this play is going to happen and they want to respond with a numbers advantage towards the bot side. So Damwon is going to spot this one out as JDG is looking to set up the invade. Because the Twisted Fate is able to respond, flash in with the stun card, and Noguri is able to join to provide that additional manpower, it becomes very difficult. But then look what Damwon does. Canyon is going to get level 2 off of clearing this ward, and then he's immediately going to move up towards the top side of the map, straight through mid lane, and he's going to steal all these top side camps. This heavily mitigates Kanavi's ability to play through topside, shut down Camille, shut down Noguri, but also limit Zoom's impact. So he's just going to invade, steal away all these camps, and it makes things very difficult for JDG. If you attack Kanavi in the jungle, if you mitigate his early game resources, there are actually ways to shut this team down. So as I transition back over to the desk, I think that I want to highlight here, and the main point is that this game is going to be very much about the junglers and their influence on the game.
And just to kind of bounce off of that, and in tandem with what Lyric said and those beautiful, disrupting to Kanavi that you just set up, it feels like Coach Ohm behind JDG has kind of fumbled the meta read and a lot of the priorities in draft. Kanavi is not being set up to the same amount of success, multiple Silas picks is kind of a head scratcher, as someone like Sofm. So in this current meta, in this current moment, while I do still consider JD the better team and the favorites in this matchup, there is a very real world where Suning have a better read on the meta. The meta is perfect for Sofm right now to run amok on things like his Graves, and you could have a very real world where Suning are a true dark horse in this tournament, that they upset JDG and make a deep run.
And I think that what is so good about Suning is their ability to get these early advantages. Like, when you look at their 3 games against G2, they found themselves with those early leads in pretty much every single game. Where things started to falter was the mid game, and I think that that's where Frosk and I look at this matchup specifically and can see ways in which JDG can bounce back, because the mid to late game stages feel very in favor of JDG.
I'm very happy you brought that up, because it's easy to get lost in the flashy plays of Sofm, but we even saw in that initial game versus G2, which G2 somehow ended up winning, it's not always enough to only have your jungler be the one that is completely outplaying the opponents. Everything has to work, and that is where the machine, the well-oiled machine of JDG, probably has the upper hand.
In its most simplistic form, the longer the game stays in just lane phase, probably the better Suning's chances are, because Sofm is obsessed with jungle timers.
Yes.
Lyric said it, we will say it. I'm sure you'll hear it on the cast. Watch this guy on Krug, Raptors, Gromp. He will constantly forego a blue buff, a red buff, a dragon, a rift herald to make sure that he keeps his timers up, because he's obsessed with the jungle experience. He's obsessed with making sure that his CS is very powerful. What that means is that as soon as you get into the team fight phase, there are chances where you'll have a numbers advantage, because Sofm has decided that Wolf Camp is more important than this dragon fight, and his team didn't get the memo. And that's where JDG have the advantage. They are bigger than the sum of their parts. They don't have as many superstars as other teams in the LPL, but combined, they are such a beautiful, well-oiled machine. So if it's an even game and we go to team fight phase, JDG should win 99% of those.
And I do want to set the expectation for people at home. We are heralding this in as kind of a more aggressive game than yesterday, but it's not necessarily going to be in the first 15 minutes, right? We need to caution for that.
Yeah, I actually don't think that this will be that aggressive. Maybe both teams, like, it'll
really?
go... Well, here's the thing. It'll go one of two ways. Either both teams will gear up for level 1s, and they'll just try to run into each other, and then you're like, yeah, we got aggression all over. Or if everyone handshakes on it, we have split maps every single time. Because Sofm is obsessed with the jungle timer, and Kanavi's probably going to be playing a hard farming jungle anyway, it will actually be a really stable game until we get to that team fight phase that Shox is talking about.
I feel like game 1 is just going to be a bloodbath. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but I just feel that whenever you have two top-tier LPL teams meeting a best-of-5 at Worlds, like, my history of LPL teams in best-of-5 at this tournament has been nothing but bloodshed, violence, and action.
So Sofm is going to look at his bot lane, he's going to be like, you're worth 300 gold, but these Krugs.
But also, like, I'm also looking at these top laners too, because I think that when we look at Bin, we already heard it in the teaser, right? He is a player that loves to play aggressive, he loves to get his own advantages, and I think that when you open up Kanavi, he's someone that will actively play through Zoom, and I think that both top laners have had a stellar tournament and have really been able to showcase what they can do on the international stage. So I think that a lot of the violence is going to come from these two, and I think there's going to be a lot of action towards the top side of the map.
What I don't understand is why Noah tries to take Bin down. They just leave him alone. They're like, oh, I'm sure you'll be okay. And the other top laners up there like, please, God, help me. But here's the thing about Bin. That's a perfect example. It's the 51% play. You know, when he had that incredible moment on Gangplank and he finds the flank and he blows up G2, that was Suning's game to lose, but they were actually in a position where they could have lost it because they had failed to close out for so long that G2 had gotten so much more powerful and could contest in 5v5s. And when they got the Baron, the safest play would be to stall out G2 on the Elder fight and have the Gangplank, who was already top lane, end the game. Use cross-map pressure. And Bin's the type of player that's like, I'm flanking on Gangplank. Let's go.
And let's not forget, that's how TES got the upper hand over JDG. The clutch factor was bigger, and that can be important in these best-of-5 moments. So I am expecting JDG to also step up to the plate in that regard. So that brings us to our predictions. I was quite surprised by Mr. Lyric voting with his heart and voting for Suning. Who's going to win and why and in how many games?
Who do you want to start with?
You.
Right. I actually predicted JDG 3-1 in this series. I actually think that while I think Suning have showcased a lot of positive things, some of their games versus G2 left me a little underwhelmed in how I felt like their ability to gain advantages in the mid game. And I think that they're not going to be given those same opportunities against a team like JDG. I think that their mid game is much crisper. I do think that JDG will just actively fight you a lot more in the mid game. And I think that that will look to punish Suning. So I predicted 3-1.
Okay.
I'm similar in the vein of Vedius. I have been a huge fan of JDG for a long time. I think that they do not get enough respect in this tournament because they haven't really shown their true strength yet, and I have a feeling that they'll show that today in the best-of-5. I do not think that this will be close. It may appear close for a moment, but as soon as it comes to 5v5 play, JDG are on a completely different level. Now, that said, if this is a Suning victory, I do want to talk about the X factors or the clutch. It has to be Ben. You know, we talk about this 51% plays. We talk about the fact that Suning have such an unclear ceiling. No one really knows the highs that they can climb to. The question is, do they do that today, because that's what can eclipse JDG. It's the same way that top eclipsed JDG. That means Bin's the clutch here, and Yagao is the clutch here. Yagao has those pocket picks. He can pull out the Jace. He can change a completely different draft, and no one's really paying attention to him. And it's just unfortunate that this meta will kind of hide the differences between Angel and Yagao unless he does find one of those creative picks.
Right, and let's not forget, out of the 10 players on the Rift today, only one has been here before. In fact, Swordart has played 87 games at Worlds and at MSI in the last couple of years, so maybe that leadership will come in handy for Suning, but it's going to be a tough one. Time to see who comes out on top in this battle between regional rivals as we send it over to Captain Flowers and Azael for Game 1.